Hello. I hope that you are doing okay. Here's a story. The Fisherman and His Wife. Once there was a fisherman who lived with his wife in a miserable little hut built of sticks and mud, not far from the sea. Every day the fisherman went fishing, but he did not catch much, and they were often hungry. But one day, as he sat fishing by a deep, clear pool, he hooked a big fish, and his line ran far out before he could haul in. But at length he landed a large flounder. "Ha-ha!" cried the fisherman, "a fine dinner." "Not so," said the flounder. "You would find me quite tasteless, for I am not really a fish, but a fairy prince who is under a spell. I must remain a flounder until the enchantment comes to an end. So please don't kill me, but take the hook carefully out of my mouth and put me back into the sea." "Of course I will," answered the fisherman. "It would never do to harm a fish that can talk." So he took out the hook as carefully as he could and threw the flounder back into the deep, clear pool. Down to the bottom went the fish, leaving a long streak of blood behind him. And home to his hut went the fisherman, with nothing for supper but a good story to tell his wife. "An enchanted prince," she cried angrily, "and you let him get away without asking him to grant us a wish. Truly, you are even more of a fool than I thought. Back you go to the pool and call for the flounder. If he is really a fairy prince, he is bound to come, and he'll certainly grant you a wish. You don't really want to live in this wretched, dirty hut all your life, do you? Go and ask him to give us a fine cottage in which we can be really comfortable. And mind you speak properly to this enchanted prince. Off you go at once." Well, the fisherman did not quite like this, but he dared not disobey his wife. So back he went to the pool, and when he got there, the sea was all green and yellow and no longer smooth. But he stood on the shore and cried, "Magic flounder of the sea, come, I pray you, here to me, for my wife, my Isabel, bids me beg you for a spell." Up through the water came the flounder and said, "Well then, what spell does your wife wish me to cast?" "Ah," said the fisherman, "I hardly like to ask you this, but she says that as I did not catch you and then let you go, I ought to have wished for something. She does not like living in a hut. She wants a fine cottage." "Go home," said the flounder. "She is living in a fine cottage already." Home went the fisherman in a hurry, and sure enough, his wife met him at the door of a beautiful cottage and led him in to see the pretty little parlour and the bedroom, the kitchen and the pantry, with its good plain furniture and its dishes of brass and tin. Behind the cottage was a yard with hens and ducks in it, and there was also a little garden with flowers and fruit. "Look," said his wife, "isn't this better than a hut?" "It is indeed," answered the fisherman, "and now we have nothing else to wish for." "We will see about that," said his wife. Sure enough, a few weeks later she exclaimed impatiently, "Listen, husband, this cottage is far too small and mean. The flounder should have given us something larger. Go back and tell him to give us a castle." "Ah, wife," said the fisherman, "this cottage is all we need. Why ever should we want to live in a castle?" "Ridiculous," cried his wife. "Off you go this instant and tell the fish to give us a castle quickly." The fisherman's heart grew heavy. "It is not right to ask for more," he said. "The flounder has been very kind to us. I shall not go." But he went, for he dared not disobey his wife. And when he got to the pool, the sea was quite purple and dark blue, and grey and thick, though there was still no sound of a storm. So he stood on the shore and cried, "Magic flounder of the sea, come, I pray you, here to me, for my wife, my Isabel, bids me ask another spell." Up through the water came the flounder and said, "Well, what does she want this time?" "Alas," said the fisherman sadly, "she is not content with the cottage. She wants to live in a great stone castle." "Go home," said the flounder. "She is living in a great stone castle already." Home went the fisherman in a hurry, and sure enough, in place of the cottage stood a great stone castle with a deer park round it and acres of gardens on either side. His wife met him at the door and led him through a great hall paved with marble, where many servants ran hither and thither. They passed through room after room, beautifully furnished with rich tapestries and crystal chandeliers and rare furniture, until they came to their bedroom. Here the carpet was as soft as down, and the bed had sheets of scented silk. "Isn't this beautiful?" said his wife. "Yes, indeed," answered the fisherman. "Now truly we have no more to wish for." "We'll see about that tomorrow," she answered, and so they went to bed. But when she woke next morning and looked out of the window over the beautiful countryside to the distant towns and villages, the fisherman's wife shook her husband roughly. "Get up," she shouted, "and look out of the window. We ought to be king and queen of all this land. So hurry down to the seashore and tell the flounder to make it so." "Ah, wife, I do not want to be king," said the fisherman sadly. "Surely we should be content as we are." "If you don't want to be king," shouted his wife, "I do. And what's more, king I will be. Off you go at once." The fisherman's heart grew heavier still. "It's not right to ask for more," he muttered. "The flounder has been very kind to us. I shall not go." But he went, for he could not disobey his wife. And when he came to the pool, the sea looked dark and grey, and the water heaved up from below and smelt strangely. However, he stood on the shore and cried, "Magic flounder of the sea, come, I pray you, here to me, for my wife, my Isabel, asks, although I think not well." Up through the water came the flounder and said, "Oh, what does she want this time?" "Alas," said the fisherman, "she wants to be king." "Go home," said the flounder, "she is already king." Home went the fisherman, and sure enough the castle had become a great palace with soldiers drilling in the courtyard, and in the hall his wife sat on a golden throne, wearing a crown on her head, while trumpeters blew a fanfare at his approach. "Ah, wife, so you are king," said the fisherman. "Yes," she answered shortly, "now I am king." "Now you are king," he added anxiously, "surely there is nothing else you could ask for." "There you are wrong," she answered crossly. "There's nothing unusual in being king. What I ought to be is emperor. Back you go to the flounder at once and tell him that I must be emperor." "You cannot be emperor," gasped the fisherman. "I will not ask the flounder for any more." "What?" cried his wife. "You dare to disobey me? Remember that I am the king, and you are merely my husband. Do as I command you, this instant." Off went the fisherman, muttering, "Trouble will come of this." And when he reached the pool, it was to find the sea quite black and thick, boiling and bubbling up from below, while a sharp wind lashed it into foam. The fisherman was afraid, but he stood on the edge and cried, "Magic flounder of the sea, come, I pray you, here to me, for my wife, my Isabel, asks a thing that is not well." Up through the water came the flounder and said, "What is it that she wants this time?" "Alas," said the fisherman, she wants to be emperor." "Go home," said the flounder, "she is already emperor." So the fisherman went home, and this time the very doors were of gold, while his wife the emperor sat on a throne made of solid gold, with a diamond crown on her head and kings to attend on her. "Ah, wife, now you are emperor, you must be content indeed," exclaimed the fisherman. "Content?" she cried sharply. "What nonsense! I must be pope. Off to that flounder you go at once, and tell him my commands." "I could not ask him for that," gasped the fisherman. "There is only one pope, and he cannot grant it." "How ridiculous you are!" cried his wife. "If he can make me emperor, he can make me pope. Go this instant. I, the emperor, command it." Then the fisherman was afraid, but he dared not disobey his wife, so he set off for the seashore. But when he reached the pool, he was afraid indeed, for a great tempest was blowing, and the waves splashed fiercely on the shore. Nevertheless, he stood by the edge and cried, "Magic flounder of the sea, come, I pray you, here to me, for my wife, my Isabel, asks what I scarce dare to tell." Up through the water came the flounder and said, "What does she want this time?" "Alas," said the fisherman, she wants to be pope." "Go home," said the flounder, "she is already pope." So the fisherman went, and when he got there, he found a mighty cathedral surrounded by palaces. He pushed his way through the crowds, and inside, where thousands of candles burnt brightly, he saw his wife, dressed in gold and sitting on a throne, with 3 crowns on her head. And now emperors and kings knelt before her and kissed her foot. "Wife," said the fisherman, "are you really pope now?" "Yes," she answered, "I am the pope." So he stood looking at her, and it was just as if he were looking at the bright sun. "Now," said he at last, "you have nothing more to ask, for you cannot be anything greater than pope." "I'm not so sure of that," she answered. Then they went off to bed, and the fisherman fell asleep at once, for he had run about a good deal that day. But his wife could not sleep, for in her greediness she was trying to think what there was left for her to be. At last she saw the sun rise in the red dawn, and she sat up in bed exclaiming, "Why cannot I too command the sun to rise and set?" Then she kicked her husband and shouted to him, "Husband, wake up. There is one more powerful than I am, and that is God. So go to the flounder this instant and tell him to make me as powerful as God." Hearing this, the fisherman fell out of bed in horror. "Alas, wife, what are you saying?" he gasped. "I tell you, I cannot bear to think that anyone is more powerful than I am," she said. "If I can't command the sun and the moon to rise, but must look on and see them rising in spite of me, I shall never be happy again. So go and tell the flounder to make me equal with God." "Alas, "Alas, wife," sobbed the fisherman on his knees before her, "the flounder cannot do that. Be content as Pope, surely that is enough." But then she fell into a great rage, and the end of it was that the fisherman got dressed quickly and rushed out of the palace into the great storm which was raging. The trees were falling on all sides as he came down to the shore, and the sea and sky were as black as pitch, while the thunder roared and the lightning flashed, and the waves seemed as high as mountains. But the terrified fisherman stood by the edge of the pool and cried, "Magic flounder of the sea, come, I pray you, here to me, for my wife, my Isabel, asks you what I dare not tell." Up through the water came the flounder and said, "What does she want this time?" "Alas, alas," cried the fisherman, "she wishes to be equal with God." "Go home," said the flounder. "She is living once more in the dirty little hut made of sticks and mud." So the fisherman went and found her in the miserable hut with nothing to eat, and there they live to this very day. The end. Thank you for listening. Have a lovely day or a pleasant evening. Take care of you.